I love these histories because they remind us that our faith is personal, but it is not private. The choices we as individuals make impact the whole, and that's why I find these histories so fascinating.
And they also talk about that systematic piece that we're talking for the community.
Welcome to Stitchology, Devotion for Creative Heart. I am Tina Crog, and I pastor alongside the folks of St. Jacob Lutheran Church in Massillon, Ohio. My pronouns, she, her, hers.
And I am Angel Jackson, she, her, hers, and I pastor along with folks at St. Jacob's Lutheran Church in North Canton, Ohio. What are you crafting today?
I am still working on my Barbara Ann design, my cross stitch design. This has been my keep in my office craft. And I realized I was in a meeting the last time I stitched and I chose the wrong shade. So currently I am taking out stitches, which is a lesson in patience and self-forgiveness.
That is part of the reason that I see my knitting as devotion, because of that sense of having to be reminded of my human fallacy and the way that God shows up and the fact that everything can be made new.
So what are you working on? I hope you're not having to take anything out at the moment.
So I'm starting something new, actually. My current craft that I'm about to be in is also a God moment. So I'm combining the two. I'm starting something for Christmas because I have to at this time of year. My children had this really fun ladies' nativity that my parents had gotten them that they are able to play with and reenact the story. And I really wanted to get that for my niblets. This is my gender neutral term for the children of my siblings. And one of my beautiful niblets has much darker skin than I do, which, of course, in my privilege, I never looked too hard at the skin of my kids' playsets, but it is very, very white. And I do not want that for my little one. I want her to be able to see herself in those figures, as well as to have it be historically accurate, because Jesus had dark skin. Dark and beautiful skin.
In the middle.
He lived in that part of the world.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
So I decided I looked far and wide, and you can find some nativities with more accurate, darker skin tones, but they're not playable. They're beautiful and breakable. And so I am going to crochet. I'm about to start a whole, for both of my niblets are getting teeny nativity sets out of yarn crocheted.
I got so much.
It's really exciting. I'm a little daunted, but it's going to be exciting. I hate weaving in ends. And the problem with tiny little crochet projects that are so adorable is there's a lot of switching yarns and weaving in ends. It's going to be great. They're totally worth it. The God moment is that, well, first of all, I've been a little annoyed that Pastor Tina moved, and that her church is on the other side from me of a very busy shopping area, which of course is nothing compared to the traffic we face in Chicago, but it's still like you could double the amount of time that it takes to get from my house to Pastor Tina's church based on the time of the day with traffic.
Yeah.
And so usually I'm annoyed about it, but it also now means that there is a Joann's between my home and here. And so this morning I made a stop to look for, I'm using my stash. Everybody be proud of me. I'm using my stash for most of the things, right? For the colors, for the robes and all of that. But I wanted skin tone, and I was super excited to find that Lion Brand is not always my favorite of yarns, but they do have a line they call it skein tone. And they show 6 of them. I picked 3.
Oh, I love
Isn't that exciting?
Yes.
So I can have a beautiful array of skin tones for the people in my nativity set. So that was exciting.
That is so, so lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll be fun. So great. I really believe in nativities that the kids can play with. I may make another set for the church because we actually had that last year. We had a lot of littles at my Christmas Eve children's sermon that I was planning to read a book, but it turns out we had this just huge pack of them that were even too young for the storybook I had chosen. They were back behind me trying to get to the nativity set. So I ended up like kind of, yes, oh yes, that is a camel. There, like making it and telling the story. But wouldn't it be great if we had these nativities where they could actually tell the story themselves and act it out? So,
Well, I don't know if you've heard of Mary on the Mantle.
oh, I did.
So I brought Mary on the Mantle here to St. Jacob last year. It's by a Catholic organization called Dia Heart, and they have options so you can buy Marys and Jesus and Josephs that look like a variety of skin tones you can choose. I chose the Middle Eastern looking one. And the idea is that over the 4 weeks of Advent leading up to Christmas, instead of doing the elf on the shelf, you have Mary on the Mantle and you help her get ready for baby Jesus. You help her make baby clothes and she goes and visits cousin Elizabeth. And so I
Great.
bought like a little suitcase so the kids
That's
could
so
like pack the suitcase and imagine. And that is just, it's a good way of rethinking how we tell the story. Kids learn through play, and the more
Yeah,
we can play and teach at the same time, the better. So
it's really fun. Where have you seen God this week?
I've seen God on my back. We have back deck that looks over a, I'm hesitant to say a ravine. It's really someone's driveway, but there's a lot of trees. But when you're on that back deck, it's like you're in this oasis. It feels like you're in the mountains. We've been working on fixing it up, getting new furniture and stuff to be out there so we can be on it and play out there. And where I have seen God in this is seeing how my daughter is interacting with this space and the rituals she's building around this space. So my mom watches her at our house one day a week and she set up this little water table. And my mom brought the animals, these little plastic play school farm animals out, and like they were swimming in the water. And so Jillian, every time she goes there, she makes all of the routine sounds. And one day she was doing that. And so I started singing a Lori Berkner song about animals. And now every time Jillian goes out on the deck with me, she wants to sing this particular Lori Berkner song. And that is a part of this ritual that she has built around this space. So this is a learning for me to continue shifting how I think about where God is in space and how space shapes us and these rituals we form. It's just something that I'm really living in right now.
Yeah, really great.
As one of our crafting options for this soul food series, Baker Dawn Prinzhorn has curated a weekly bread recipe for us. You can find that recipe in the Soul Food Stitch-Along Drive. Access to the drive can be found at our website at stitchologycrafts.com and selecting Soul Food. Here's a little taste of why Dawn selected this week's recipe.
Hello, Miss Dawn. What bread do you have for us this week 3?
Well, this week I have honey oatmeal bread.
Ooh.
It was my daughter Beth's recipe, and I think it has an excellent flavor, but it should because it has honey and butter and eggs in it. And I don't know anything that has honey and butter in it that would not taste good.
Exactly. How can you go wrong?
How can you go wrong is right. I think it makes excellent sandwiches and it makes wonderful toast.
I can concur that it makes wonderful toast because I'm pretty sure this is one of the gifts you've given me.
The other thing I like about this recipe is it makes 2 loaves. So you can keep one loaf for yourself and give one away.
I really like so many things about this. The fact that it came from someone you love. So the way that we share recipes is beautiful. And then the fact that it makes two loaves and you have to share.
Right. And that way I can try one loaf so I know that the loaf I'm giving away is going to be okay.
Makes total sense. Thank you so much, Miss Dawn. Our topic for today is another one of my favorite stories.
Because they're all your
Because
favorite.
they're all my favorite. Because I love stories, that's probably the heart of that. Is the widow of Zarephath.
So before we get into this, can I talk a little bit about the genre?
Yeah. So what are we reading?
We are in First Kings, and this is a Deuteronomistic history, which sounds very pretentious.
Yeah. Fancy.
But there are different types of historical books in the Bible. They all are trying to convey a lesson through their teaching about how God is interacting with God's people. And Deuteronomistic histories have a very specific lens. The lens of these books is to try to help the people understand how the rise and fall, how the joys and sorrows that people experience are directly related to whether or not the leaders uphold the laws found in Deuteronomy. When the kings are following the Deuteronomic laws, the people prosper. And when the leaders fail to uphold that law, the people suffer. And I love these histories because they remind us that our faith is personal, but it is not private. And so the choices we as individuals make impact the whole. And that's why I find these histories so fascinating.
And they also talk about that systematic piece that we've been talking about in our last 2 weeks of this series, is that sense of, like, we're not talking for you, we're talking for the community, right? For the good of all. And the Deuteronomistic histories are really focused on that. So when a king is not following these laws, these regulations that lead to life for the whole community, God sends a prophet.
Yeah.
Right. And so what is a prophet?
Oh, so a prophet is a type of faithful follower, but they're set apart with specific marking. You know, a prophet is actually a prophet by some of these, what I call key characteristics. The first is that they always get a title. They're either referred to as like the man of God or son of man sometimes. They're always directly labeled as belonging to God, which is why later Jesus gets that title of Son of Man, because the New Testament writers are trying to link Jesus to the lineage of the prophet. Prophets sometimes have the ability to see into the future, even centuries into the future. But when they foretell into the future, there's always a physical sign in the moment that they give that prophecy that helps the audience know that this is a real prophecy. Because in this time in other parts of the world, other faith traditions had prophets. We would call them like fortune tellers today. How do you know the difference between a prophecy from God versus like someone trying to sell you a fortune at a carnival? And the way that we know that the prophecies from God are real is because they are always sealed with some sort of dramatic sign, like a withering hand or the destruction of a temple or an altar. God does something cosmic in nature to help us know that these prophecies are real. Acts of healing are frequently the signs that God uses to help validate the.
So generally they're like, these prophets are messengers from God, and they're calling these kings who are on the wrong track back to where God is, wanting them to go, using these kind of tools, the marks that they've. Yeah.
Yes. And those marks are important because there are false prophets everywhere. And so this is a reassurance to the people that God's promises are true.
So we're talking about a specific prophet today that is labeled as one of the major prophets, you would say.
Yeah.
This is Elijah. And Elijah has all of these marks, right? There's hardly ever a prophet sent to Israel when things are going well. You're like, why are prophets always talking about horrible things happening? Because God only sends a prophet when things are going sideways. Which there's another passage of scripture that says, a true prophet because he, like a false prophet tells you you're doing okay. A true prophet tells you need to change your way. To Elijah's bad luck, he shows up at a time where there is a truly unfaithful king, right? King Ahab is one of the famous unfaithful kings of Israel, and his queen Jezebel is also an interesting figure. But generally, Ahab's biggest sin is that he marries Jezebel, and together they bring worship of other gods into Israel, which is one of the major kind of issues.
And one of these gods is Baal. So that may be ringing a bell for some folks.
So at this point in this story, in Elijah's story, he has spoken God's word to Ahab, and it is, you have gone wrong, and until God is pleased with you, there will be no more rain that will fall in your realm. And so there is a giant drought happening in Israel as a result, which Elijah is kind of blamed for bringing about, even though it is God's message to Ahab to get him to change his ways. One of those things is idol worship. That is generally one of the things that will get kings in trouble. But another is the treatment of the people.
Yes.
Specifically, the most vulnerable people.
Yes.
Over and over, all the scriptures talk about how you care for the stranger in your midst and the widow and the orphan.
Because the neglecting of those people for the sake of the wealthy is a form of idol worship. Idol worship is not just about another god. It is about uplifting some people above people.
Takes it away from, like, of course, I've never said a prayer to a God who isn't the one true God, etc. But there are plenty of things that I put before or trust rather than God on any given day. Okay, so specifically, our story today talks about a widow. So there's a lot of stuff floating around about widows in Israel. What can you tell us more?
The care for the widow is important because the widows are vulnerable. And sometimes those of us who are Christian or who live in a modern world assume that there were no protection for women at all in the ancient world or in the Jewish tradition. And that is just not factual. Women were vulnerable because women are vulnerable. We're vulnerable to physical attack. We're vulnerable to rape and abuse. These are real things. And so having a protector who would be watching out for a woman and her safety was important to the people. And so many laws were created to help ensure that women would have protection built in. And the easiest way to do that is through marriage. There are Roman laws in certain provinces that we see that specify that if a woman is of childbearing age, she needs to get married within so many months or years after the death of her husband, which to us can seem really insensitive. There were a lot of Levitical laws that talked about who a woman could remarry into in order to protect her inheritance. This is not to say that a woman would lose her inheritance if she did not remarry. Women who did not have a male heir in Jewish law still retained the inheritance of their husbands if they were of a certain age or status. So there is sometimes an association of poverty with widows, but that is because they are vulnerable, and women who had a hard time remarrying when they were of childbearing age would have been expected to marry. Usually the poverty that's associated with widows are for women whose husbands' inheritances went to their sons, who then failed to take care of. So I think that's an important distinction for us to keep in mind, that these laws, these are not mean Jewish or Roman laws. These are laws that are intended to protect. And when those laws are not upheld, then we see the vulnerability of the widow and the orphan and the stranger.
Yeah. So basically, these are like we have a widow who is really desperate, and that has to do with the fact that God's laws aren't being followed in this land. If they were, right?
On multiple levels, that her king is not protecting her by enforcing these laws, and that the people are not protecting her by living out these laws without being forced to. Yeah, it's a double. The mistreatment of widows is always like a double revelation of neglect.
Fun. So that gives us some background as we move into 1 Kings 17, 7 through 16. I'm in the Common English Bible. After a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. The Lord's word came to Elijah. Get up and go to Zarephath near Sidon and stay there. I have ordered a widow there to care for you. Elijah went and left and went to the Zarephath. As he had come to the town gate, he saw a widow collecting sticks. He called out to her, "Please get a little cup of water for me so I can drink." She went to get some water. He then said to her, "Please get me a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any food. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a bit of oil in a bottle. Look at me. I'm collecting 2 sticks so that I can make some food for myself and my son. We'll eat the last of the food and then die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go and do what you said. Only make a little loaf of bread for me first, then bring it to me. You can make something for yourself and your son after that. This is what Israel's God, the Lord, says. The jar of flour won't decrease, and the bottle of oil won't run out until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth." The widow went and did what Elijah said. So the widow, Elijah, and the widow's household ate for many days. The jar of flour didn't decrease, nor did the bottle of oil run out, just as the Lord spoke through Elijah.
I'm Laura Franks Benton from Just Brave Enough. Just Brave Enough is a writing collective I've formed with a diverse group of clergy women friends. We write first-person narratives using holy imagination from the perspective of named and unnamed biblical women. From there, we write worship liturgy and no-prep curriculum. Check us out and download a sample at justbraveenough.com. When I'm starting a writing project and don't know quite what to do, I often turn to poetry and writing prompts. I am delighted to share one of each of those with you today. All Bread by Margaret Atwood. All bread is made of wood, cow dung, packed brown moss, the bodies of dead animals, the teeth and backbones, what is left after the ravens. This dirt flows through the stems into the grain, into the arm, 9 strokes of the axe, skin from a tree, good water, which is the first gift, 4 hours. Live burial under a moist cloth, a silver dish, the row of white salmon bellies swollen and taut in the oven, lungfuls of warm breath stopped in the heat from an old sun. Good bread has the salt taste of your hands after 9 strokes of the axe, the salt taste of your mouth. It smells of its own small death, of the deaths before and after. Lift these ashes into your mouth, your blood. To know what you devour is to consecrate it. Almost. All bread must be broken so it can be shared. Together we eat this earth. In this poem, Margaret Atwood is taking something ordinary, bread, and considering the ingredients behind the ingredients, to create a different sort of recipe. She doesn't shy away from the reality of punishing labor and starvation for much of the world's population. It's jarring to think of such things next to something as comforting as freshly baked bread. She does something else, too. She underlines the sacrament of eating and the unity of eating. So, in your writing today, think about the true journey of a food you enjoy. Meat, perhaps, or an exotic fruit shipped halfway around the globe for your table. Perhaps it's coffee or chocolate. Write a prayer of gratitude for the hardships of the people who bring it to you.
What is it that we actually know about this woman with Elijah?
Yeah. We know that she has a child, and that more than likely the child isn't old enough to care for her yet. On the other hand, the only thing we really know for sure is that she's almost out of food.
Yeah.
That could be for a lot of reasons having to do with this drought and famine.
I find this to be a really interesting story because we see multiple layers of the Deuteronomic law at play here. We have providing for the widow and welcoming of the immigrant. Elijah is coming to her as a stranger. And so the hospitality code existed that she should be providing. I think it's really interesting that she's like, look, I would, but I don't have anything.
Yeah, it's really a sign that things are in a very bad way in Israel. That the fact that she is even considering breaching the hospitality because of this.
Yeah, it's a reminder that sometimes our choices have ripple effects that we don't even see.
The ways we can get caught up in systems that are so unjust so that their only output is going to be injustice.
Yeah. I've often thought of this like her final meal, we're going to eat this final meal of water.
I don't really think of. I think she's collecting the sticks to cook with.
I've always thought that I think that like that twig tea that
Oh, or like stone soup, or if you just like add that. No, I think she's collecting the sticks to cook with.
never have I ever thought that. I always thought, every time that Kevin, he loves this twig tea that he drinks. Every time he smells it, I think of the widows.
Okay, well, either way, right?
Yeah, so what did you think? Was she eating that soup? Was she making a fire?
It's a good question. Either way, it's not a very full meal. Bread and flour and oil make something edible, but not tasty. So even then, she's really at the bottom of things. And it kind of goes back to our discussion last week of God gives the basics that provide life. And sometimes of that, in the hard times, that is what we get.
And then we see the prophecy. The prophecy is that the water will come. And the sign that the water will come, that the famine will end, is this jar of food that does not run out.
So that because God provides the little thing, then of course God will provide the big thing, the eventual reversal and restoration of the entire nation.
Yeah.
Which is bigger than I'm going to feed you because you fed me.
Yeah.
In the whole Elijah and the widow relationship. That is a good reminder that everything prophets do have implications for the entire community, not just one person.
Yeah. I mean, it will be so easy to read the verse 14 and think that it's just about providing for the widow. But he's saying the Lord is going to send rains on the surface of the earth. And this is the sign.
I was talking about this with Bible study that I was in. Oh, no, we were talking about it at a tech study about how we often expect too little of God, right? And so this kind of, like, oh, look, it's a miracle. God gave food to this woman. And then it's like, oh, God has intentions of bringing food to the entire nation again. But it just we're not quite there yet. There is, though, the sense and the way that we've read the story often is that sense of the woman's willingness to share means that she won't go without. There's always a danger of us wanting to treat God like a vending machine, right? Like, here, God, I put in my good works and now, but so many stories I've heard of faithful people who have stretched in their generosity to give more than it was comfortable, and that God has given back. Maybe not in the same way, but that God has continued to provide the things they needed to continue to share.
In my experience, the communities that have been the most generous have been the communities that are the most impoverished. And this can be one of the tensions that those of us who kind of live in the middle feel like, why aren't you saving that? Why are you spending that? Save it for the future. But when you have so little, the joy of having so little makes you want to share it and experiencing it with others, when all I'm thinking of is like, what about how are you going to get to next week, right? They trust that next week is going to come.
And that trust has been borne out in communities that actually live in community. Our tendency to live individualistically is the thing that says it's the responsible thing to do to take care of myself. And yet, a lot of those communities that where we look at folks and say, oh, they have very little, they survive because when someone has, they share.
Yeah.
And then the next time when someone else has, they share. And it's the way a community thrives in many ways. And our individualistic thinking has moved us away in a lot of ways from that.
What does it mean to use the money that you have faithfully? We are called to be good stewards with what we have. I think the widow is trying to do that here. She's like, I have a son I have to take care of. I only have a little bit. If I'm only called to care for him one more day, that's what I'm called to do. And Elijah's like, okay, I hear you. And also God is going to provide. You need to be a good steward with what you have and also trust that provision is coming. Where is the line between storing and saving for what's next and then trusting that God's going to give us what we need?
Yeah, for sure. There's a sense of hope, right, that I'm struck by in the midst of the story, because the story, the widow is hopeless. That, like, this is the end. And it's a reminder to me that God is never done. That God is always doing a new thing, whatever that looks like.
What I really like about this passage is that because of God's provision, this woman is able to then return to the law and live it faithfully. Because God gives her what she needs, she is able to extend that hospitality. Thinking back to what we talked about last week with the wanting to hoard, she could have gotten this meal and been like, all right, I'm going to save it. But she does share it instead.
Yeah. Lots of good stuff about feeding bodies and also souls. Well, that concludes our conversation about the widow and about her hospitality and about the prophet calling us back to justice and faithful sharing so that all are fed. Now, may the God of inspiration bless your resting and your making.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of our Soul Food Stitch Along season. Please remember you can find all previous and upcoming craft alongs at our website at stitchologycrafts.com. We would like to thank you for supporting us by being our listener. We are grateful for the support of both of our congregations, but that support has limits. All of the audio equipment, hosting fees, advertising costs, all that funding comes out of our own pockets, which averages about $50 per episode. We invite you to prayerfully consider becoming a sponsor by making a donation at stitchologycrafts.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, happy stitching!